Tonight on Primetime Politics, looking for a better deal.
We believe that we didn't get enough when it comes to the F-35.
Canada considers new fighter jets from Sweden, citing jobs and industrial spin-offs. But what would it mean to back down from the earlier enthusiasm for the F-35? We'll speak to a former commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Also,
the opposition parties are going to have to continue to approach these issues with the same level of seriousness that the government is.
Now that the budget is passed, what does the government need to do to sell Canadians on its economic game plan? We'll dig into some recent numbers from Leger. And
part of an energy transition, we're going to help to lead it. That means Alberta, that means Quebec.
A pipeline for Alberta. We'll dig into the latest. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The Prime Minister welcomed the King and Queen of Sweden to Ottawa today, a rare royal visit from that country as Canada and Sweden launches a new strategic partnership, agreeing to work closer together on, among other things, clean power, critical minerals, research, and defense. Now, that last point carries some extra weight as well, because Canada is now considering a purchase of Saab Gripens, a fighter jet that came second in a competition to the F-35 years ago, but a Swedish jet that might still win a contract from Canada as this country looks to diversify where it spends its defense dollars and considers the industrial benefits a purchase might create.
We believe that we didn't get enough when it comes to the F-35s. The industrial benefits are not enough. There needs to be more jobs created out of the F-35 contract. That's clear to me and clear to this government. And at the same time, we think that we can use military procurement to get more. And that is why we're looking indeed at the Gripen, and we're having conversations with Saab. So I'm having conversations with Saab, which is offering at this point 10,000 jobs. We'll see how that is concrete. And at the same time, we're looking at what Lockheed Martin can do more.
Well, to talk about the Gripen fighter, we're now joined by retired Lieutenant General Yvan Blondin. From 2012 to 2015, he was commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force. General, good to see you again. Thank you for the time.
Let's see you again, Michael.
So the government seems very open at this point to buying into Saab's Gripen fighter program. This would be in addition to Lockheed Martin's F-35s. But, you know, based on an editorial that you co-wrote this morning, you seem to think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you seem to think this would be a bad idea because of what? Concerns over having a mixed fleet?
Well, the concerns are the definition of a mixed fleet and how do you want to use a second fleet. If you're using too small of a fleet and you're mixing it, then you're reducing the overall capabilities. If you're talking about 88 platforms and now you want to reduce the number of F-35s, add a number of Gripens, and you want to use them all in the same role, which is the defense of Canada. This is a bad idea. This is a reduction in overall capability, and we should not go there. The defense of Canada is not a risk with the F-35, and the F-35 is the best platform to be doing this, especially if we're going to be doing it with the Americans. It doesn't mean that the second fleet is not a good idea, but it should come as an addition to a first fleet of F-35s and doing a different role. Mixing the roles or expecting the two platforms to be doing the same role together is a recipe for disaster.
So would you be more open then if, for example, the government was very clear that the Gripen would, for example, be used in Arctic deployment and the F-35s in more southern regions of the country? Would that alleviate any of your concerns?
No, not at all. The defense of Canada is integrated from the south to the north. We don't have any airplanes based in the north. They're all based together and they're operating together. It's a large country, but for an air force, it's certainly an integrated area of operation. The idea of mixing them all and expecting them to work together is just not understanding how the military works.
But the Gripen deal, from what's been reported, does come with, industrial benefits here. Saab apparently looking to build their jet fighters here, and immediately that means Canadian jobs. Is that something to be overlooked?
No, it's certainly something that is important to me, important to all the Canadians. But I would propose that a Gripen is not a good idea, or I'd say Gripen, a European airplane, to work in partnership in Canada. You need to stay with one fleet, and F-35 is the best way to do this. The Gripen as an expeditionary capability to be working within NATO is a good idea, and it's something feasible. But it needs to be delayed in time because right now the RCAF doesn't have many pilots to do the transition from the F-18 to one fleet. To expect it to do a transition from the F-18 to two fleets is just increasing the number of required pilots, and it just doesn't exist. It would push a transition beyond the time when the F-18 is expecting to fly, and it would reduce considerably our ability to defend Canada, and we'd have to explain to the Americans why they need to take over for a while, because we're just not ready to take it over. So we should be protecting that thing. It's too late. Let's keep on going with the F-35, and let's think about a second capability now towards Europe. But that capability needs to be what we need in 2035, not what we needed in 2015. And the discussion about the Gripen or fourth generation airplanes is exactly that. It's stuff that we needed 10 years ago. In 2035, we're going to be flying fleets of manned platforms with combat drones. Drones that are the size of a fighter aircraft, but are unmanned. It's going to be much reduced need for manned platforms. So if today I would use 100 Gripens to fly as a second fleet, in 2035, what I'd want to have is a fleet of maybe 25 Gripen and 75 combat drones to go with this.
Okay, so wait for the Gripen until technology gets better down the road. Stick with the F-35 right now is what I'm hearing from you. But wouldn't Canada have more autonomy with the Gripen? With the F-35, for example, wouldn't this country need some type of approval from Washington if you were to deploy them in operations that don't directly involve the United States or have United States approval?
Yeah, well, this is the risk, and this is when you consider the two roles that you have. The priority role, the main role in Canada is the defense of Canada. It's where you need to put your best platforms and the best capability that you can have. In an increased threatening world, a fleet of 88 F-35s for the defense of Canada is a good capability. And it's probably the best way to defend North America, especially connecting with other F-35s and all the systems that the Americans are going to be throwing into this. We're just not going to be able to do it with any other platform.
Okay. I think part of
the idea of having...
Sorry, continue, General.
The idea of a second fleet makes military sense and becomes useful in the sense of mitigating the risk if you want to have a capability to intervene outside of Canada, and that's when expeditionary force based on Gripen, but it could be based on a Rafale or a Typhoon with drones, is a capability that we should be adding to what we're planning for the defense of Canada.
Okay, so the defense of Canada is solely F-35. But I think part of the problem is right now the politics of this as well, General, because here we have Canada spending the vast majority of its defense dollars into the United States, and at the same time having a U.S. administration that only openly talks about annexing Canada. Is that not a problem?
Well, I read this, but the defense of Canada is the defense of the United States. It's all together. It's the defense of North America. When we put F-35s out there in the north, it's a binational command. It's American officers with Canadian officers doing the checking, analyzing, tasking of all those planes and controlling the defense independently. We've done this for the last 50 years, independently of ups and downs in relationships between Canada and the U.S. Now, we're at a bad time. It may not come back to where we were. But certainly the defense of North America is going to be a priority for the U.S. and a priority for Canada. And the best way of doing it will still be, even if we're still tense in relations, to be doing it together. It's to everybody's advantage. And this is not where the Americans would put pressure not to use the F-35, because it's as much their advantage as it is ours.
Lieutenant General Yvan Blondin, thank you. Always appreciate the time.
You're welcome.
Well, to the budget now, as the federal government tabled its budget implementation bill this afternoon. But unlike the drama of last night's confidence vote on adopting the budget itself, today's proceedings were quick and without much controversy.
OK. Adopted. Je déclare la motion adoptée avec dissidence.
And with that, the implementation bill will now make its way through the House and be debated in the weeks to come. As for the governing Liberals, well, they now have the job of selling their budget to Canadians, which, according to Léger, may not be that easy. Initial reaction to Carney's first budget has been muted at best, with only 30% of Canadians giving it a positive review, 37% giving it a negative review, and 33% uncertain of what it will mean. Well, with more on the impressions of this budget, we're now joined by Andrew Enns, Executive Vice President for the polling and marketing firm Léger. Andrew, thank you for the time.
Great to be joining you, Michael.
So, you know, we began this with the general impression that you found with this budget. And as we saw, it was not all that great. But it seems the picture for the government does get better when you ask Canadians to share their impressions on specific priorities. Can you walk us through that?
Well, sure. Yeah, as you touched on, the overall impressions of the budget were pretty modest, but we did drill down into a few of the specific I would say, the highlights of the budget, and there you do find certainly some positive things to build on. Obviously, things with respect to reducing the immigration numbers was very popular. Some things with respect to housing, things on defense spending had some good support, well over 50% in terms of some of those specific measures. And I think that certainly gives some specific topics for the government to build upon. Obviously, the budget's now passed, so they can turn their attention to getting out and communicating the budget probably a little more vigorously. Yeah,
and I'll get to that in a second. But when you talk about communicating this budget to Canadians, I also want to break down a little bit of the regional response here, because when it comes to this budget, the government may encounter some challenges selling it to the regions right across the country, and to that, I'll get to Alberta and Saskatchewan in a bit. But in the areas of this country, in the regions of this country where the Liberals built their government, talk to us about the impressions of the budget and the challenge that this government has there.
Well, I think the one thing I'll say sort of interesting about the budget is that there's no massive holes regionally with respect to budget support, nor is there any obvious areas in the country where this budget was really well received. I think honestly, when you think of Atlantic Canada and Ontario, for example, key markets for this for this government, they the support on the economy, on defense, reducing immigration, they've got good support there to build upon. But it's not that overall picture. It's still pretty lukewarm and modest in those places, and I think they've got their work to do in those areas. In terms of getting out and selling the budget a bit.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to Alberta and Saskatchewan?
Well, what I'll say about Alberta and Saskatchewan, I mean, they're probably a little bit lower in terms of support for the budget. the support for the budget does break along partisan lines, and in Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular, the Conservatives have a stronger sort of vote preference, and so that does color a little bit of the support. But I'll certainly go back to the last few budgets of Justin Trudeau, for example, in 2023-24, like those were very poorly received in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Yes, partisanship played a role, but just generally, like the tone of those budgets just did not sort of sit well with those residents in those provinces. I think Mr. Carney, Prime Minister Carney, does have a little bit of a better, does come at this with a bit of a better position than his predecessor in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I think there's and I've said this before, I believe that there's still a measure of the benefit of the doubt that is being afforded Mr. Carney, and I think Albertans and Saskatchewan residents are prepared to see, can he deliver on some of these things? Will he follow through, for example, on the immigration promise? Will he deliver on some of those major projects, for example, that were also a big aspect of this budget? So I think he can go into those provinces, not, I would say, with don't expect standing ovations everywhere where you go, but I think he should get an audience that's prepared to listen to him.
You're prepared to listen. So if you were to find a path forward for this government, how do they sell this budget?
Well, I think honestly, I think Canadians were pretty clear. We ran a poll. They didn't want an election. They want to actually see some action by this government that was just elected, literally a few months ago. I think for Mr. Carney and the Liberal government, I think the best path forward for them is to start rolling up their sleeves and starting to work on elements in this budget. Find some of those things that are more on the short term. Reducing the size of the civil service was another area that was fairly popular with respect to how Canadians felt about it. Let's see some action there in terms of making some progress. They announced a lot of what was in this budget was announced in the weeks leading up to the actual budget day. So I think for Canadians, I think they hearing more announcements of what they plan to do probably is not as welcome news as opposed to some actual tangible progress on some of these areas.
Andrew, thank you for this. I really appreciate the time.
Terrific. Enjoyed speaking with you, Michael. Have a good rest of your program.
Well, as we speak about the budget, you may recall the Prime Minister was able to get his budget over the finish line with the help of the Green Party leader, Mark Carney, promising Elizabeth May that his government would meet commitments made by Canada to both the Paris Treaty on Climate Change and the Montreal Framework on Biodiversity. But how he will accomplish this while promoting national projects like a potential pipeline is a question many people are asking. Take a listen to what Mark Carney had to say about it today.
Canada is blessed. We're blessed with immense natural resources, everything from hydroelectricity through to conventional oil and gas. We're part of an energy transition. We're going to help to lead it. That means Alberta, that means Quebec, that means Ontario, that means all of Canada, it means all forms of energy.
So we will have to see how the Prime Minister navigates that challenge. But on the matter of national projects, I did speak earlier today with Corey Hogan. He is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy, also just one of two Liberal MPs from Alberta. And we talked about where things are when it comes to national projects, in particular a pipeline, and whether or not his government is feeling any pressure to deliver news on that project sooner rather than later. Corey Hogan, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So your government just announced a second tranche of national projects last week, and still missing from that list is discussion of an Alberta pipeline. When are we going to hear about one? Is it too over-optimistic to expect an announcement right now?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's missing, because the government of Alberta, when they decided they wanted to be a proponent for a pipeline project, themselves said they're not going to be in a position to bring something to the Major Projects Office until next spring. So I'm sure they're working through it. They're doing their due diligence with communities across British Columbia, including Indigenous communities, and And when they bring something forward, we'll respond to it and react to it. But there's, the government of Alberta itself has said it's not coming for a bit.
Okay, they're saying that, but I think you can appreciate the fact that pressure is right now on your government, on your Liberal government, to prove to Albertans that you're actually standing up for their priorities, amongst them pipelines.
Yeah, and I think Albertans have got a lot to be happy with the budget that was just passed. There's good economic fundamentals there. The major project office is headquartered in Calgary. It's led by Don Farrell, who is a well-known Albertan. And in the first tranche, there was also a conversation about the Pathways project, which was put in there as Pathways Plus, and the plus is more takeaway capacity, as we call it in Alberta, for oil and gas products to markets. So, I think Alberta has been one of the real strong benefactors of the major project office so far.
Okay, you say that, but I'm just thinking back to last Sunday during the Grey Cup game. As you know, the Prime Minister was booed during the coin toss at the game. Sure, he got some cheers, but he was being booed, and the polls do have Liberals at a statistical tie with Conservatives right now. Are you worried that your priorities, or at least your interpretation of how Albertans and Western Canadians should be taking things, are not meeting the moment for many people in that part of the country?
Well, first of all, Alberta and Manitoba are psychologically and geographically very far apart. But I would point to the comments.
But there were Saskatchewan fans in the crowd.
Oh, there's always Saskatchewan fans everywhere. You can't get rid of the guys. But in Alberta, the Premier of Alberta talked about her approval of the second tranche of projects. She talked about her approval of the first tranche and how positive the working relationship is, and her hopes that there will be, more news to come in the next bit.
So you don't think Albertans are losing patience? Because I can point to a headline in the National Post this weekend saying exactly that.
Oh no, I don't think so at all. I don't think that the statistics bear that out. I saw some polling the other day, I think it was from Ecos, that showed the Liberals as popular as they've ever been in Alberta.
Okay. Listen, I also want to talk about the Major Projects Office, because I think there's some question as to how that actually operates. Because if the Prime Minister is choosing the projects being fast-tracked, what's the Major Projects Office actually doing? Because at best, it could be expediting projects. At worst, it could be a rubber stamp or just another layer of bureaucracy. Can you walk us through that? Because I think some Canadians are still very confused as to what it is actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. The Major Projects Office has been given a couple of jobs to do by the Prime Minister. One of them is making sure, of course, that the projects are being considered for designation as a project of national interest, which would allow all of the approvals to happen kind of concurrently instead of in a waterfall fashion, one after the other, which means those approvals happen faster. There's a single document of permissions or regulatory requirements, and then everything can move just in a more expedited fashion, which is, a unique need of big projects, right? So that's one part of the job. The other part is helping them work through the other details and like financing, and that doesn't mean government money is going to them, but it means that, for example, the Major Project Office will help them explore their international financing opportunities, their national opportunities with private enterprises, whether there are loans available, whether there are existing grant programs from governments. Because one of the realities is to build big things in practical terms, what usually happens is government has to work with business, has to work with communities, has to work with Indigenous communities, and everybody's got to get together. And the Major Project Office is going to have that expertise to allow those things to happen more smoothly.
Okay, so who's choosing projects then? Is it the Prime Minister that's choosing projects and the office is facilitating those projects? Who's actually deciding which projects to go through?
So the proposals come from all over. At that point, they're reviewed by the Build Canada Committee of Cabinet. Recommendations are made to Dominic LeBlanc. Those recommendations go to the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And that's the short version. But the longer version is really, it's less about choosing and it's more about facilitating. It's making sure that those projects have a way to go when they need to work through some of those regulatory hoops that would otherwise exist. Find some of that financing that might otherwise be more difficult to get to. And one of the things we've heard from companies is that just the very act of having a major project process is creating investor confidence. It's saying, okay, Canada is really interested in doing this, and that certainly came up at Natural Resources Committee pretty recently.
Mm-hmm. So how should Canadians judge your government's success or failure? By how many shovels are in the ground by the spring, by the jobs created? What's the measure Canadians should be using when they consider what your government's doing with these projects of national significance, as well as the Major Projects Office?
Yeah, the yardstick is in the legislation, right? It's about, does it grow Canada's economy? Does it support our environmental goals? Does it support Indigenous reconciliation? And those are the metrics, ultimately. We want to make sure that Canada is stronger, can stand on its own internationally. We want to diversify
How will you
markets.
report that back, though? Like, are you going to give a measure? Are you going to give a report card to say this was accomplished, this was accomplished?
Yeah.
How's that going to be communicated?
Yeah, look, I think Canadians will give us the ultimate report card, but we're seeing right now, for example, in these first two waves, $116 billion of investment would come from that. That's more than the GDP of all but 4 provinces. You know, this is ultimately going to be about how we move the dial, whether we make people's lives better, whether we increase wages, whether we increase our ability to interact on the world stage and diversify our markets away from the United States. And that list will be there for everybody to see and everybody to judge.
You know, I think one of the disconnects here, Corey, is the fact that there is the business way of doing things, establishing a benchmark, establishing a process by which things go through, which your government has done. The other is showing to Canadians that you have actually delivered. And I guess that's where I'm stuck on here. How are you going to show that deliverable? In terms of a physical form that Canadians can understand, how are you going to communicate that?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, it is going to be shovels in the ground. It is going to be jobs. It is going to be economic growth. But along the way, there's going to be an awful lot of KPIs that we can turn to as well, including investment, including the fact that people are now being employed in secondary and tertiary industries. You know, when you build a big mine, for example, it's not just people at the mine that are employed. There are bankers that are employed in downtown Toronto. There are engineers that are employed in downtown Calgary. And all of that stuff tends to happen, you know, as these projects move along. So, I mean, there's much to come. Canadians will judge, but I think the early results are just awesome.
You know, I'm asking a question about communication because, you know, if you take the budget, for example, passes a big hurdle last night, but according to a recent Leger poll, 30% of Canadians believe the budget will have no impact on them. 32% believe the budget will have a negative impact on them. Your minister has spent a lot of time speaking to industry leaders in Bay Street, but has your government done enough to communicate your budget and priorities like national projects to Canadians on Main Street? Because there seems to be a disconnect if the vast majority of Canadians either don't care or don't believe the budget's going to help them.
Well, you know, that's not how I would characterize it. I think that the vast majority of Canadians think that we've got this right now, and they're going to judge based on the results as they come through. And look, I mean, polls go up, polls go down. Right now, they're looking pretty good for the government, and that's a nice thing.
But how are you going to communicate that?
You know, I think Canadians are looking at it and they're feeling pretty well communicated to. But insofar as the work that a government always does, it is our job to go out and explain to people what this means. It's our job to go out and say, this budget is passed, this is what it means to your life. This major project was put forward, this is what it means to your life. And that work's going on. I mean, that's what every MP on the government side was doing over the last week during the constituency week. And it's really just about going out there and explaining to stakeholders, explaining to individuals exactly how that changes their life for the better.
So you're happy with the cell job that's happening, or do you think there needs to be improvement?
No, look, I'm really happy. I'm also a comms guy, so I'm always the biggest critic because I see those things and I look at them. But you know, there's always more you can do. But I think it would be just nitpicking because I think all of the ministers have been out there doing good work. I think the MPs have been out there doing good work, and the proof is in the pudding.
Corey Hogan, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Tuesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.